So welcome everyone. We today have Vassilis Galanos, who is actually AI expert, and we are very excited to talk about generative AI. And let me just give a very brief intro of Vassilis. He is a teaching fellow currently in science, technology, and innovation studies at the School of Social and Political Science, University of Edinburgh, and associate editor of the Journal of Technology Analysis and Strategic Management. Vassilis researches and publishes on the interplay of expectations and expertise in the development of AI, robotics, and internet technologies, with further interest in cybernetics, media theory, invented religions, oriental and continental philosophy, community-led initiatives, and arts. Vassilis is also a book, vinyl, beer cap, and mouth harp collector, using the latter instrument to invite students to back from class break. And also it's important to mention that Vassilis completed his PhD on AI. I guess it's socio-political aspect of AI, right? In 2023, actually, from University of Edinburgh. So Vassilis is an expert in AI domain, and also particularly in its socio-political aspect of these emerging technologies. So Vassilis, welcome, and we all are looking forward to hear you. So to begin with, can I request you to just kind of give an overview what is going on in terms of generative AI, ChatGPT, and other related developments, and what you think about it?
So thank you very much for having me, Yogesh, and everyone. First, I want to say something about being an AI expert. This is very much a contested term nowadays, and I did my PhD on who counts as an AI expert. And so I'm not sure if I count as an AI expert, to be honest, but that's a general problem, that when you try to invite somebody, you don't really know what their expertise is and so on. So in my PhD, I actually argued about a dialectic between expectations and expertise. Those who shape expectations for one reason or other, for reasons of power maybe, or chance, they count as experts, but those who are considered as experts are also credible enough to shape their expectations. And I think with ChatGPT, we have a very good case where this unfolds, and it has very different nuances. We've got voices from very different domains suggesting very different things for very different reasons. So not everything is immediately accessible to us right now, because we need to think that when many people talk about ChatGPT, in the news, they might serve a specific agenda, which is great, which is everyone has an agenda, right? But we need to think a little bit more behind the facade of what appears in the big letters in the news. So with ChatGPT and generative AI, we have what we call the, I would call that the victory, the contemporary victory of connectionist artificial intelligence, of machine learning. So part of my research involved looking at the history of AI, and on a daily basis, when I talk to people about AI, they find it surprising that AI is not new as a term. It was actually coined in 1955, and even before that, there have been many attempts to speak about the same idea: electronic brains, machine thinking, automata, and so on. And there have been two chief approaches. One is that you construct intelligence, you imitate human or animal intelligence step by step on a rule-based process. And the other one is a more empirical, inductive approach, where you give the machine many examples and the machine learns out of it. So the latter one is called the connectionist. And this approach has been quite sidelined in between the 60s and the 80s. There have been some cases of resurgence, but the main problem was that we didn't have enough data to feed the machine. So these algorithms were there. So for example, you probably know of Geoffrey Hinton, a very famous AI scholar. His work on machine learning neural network algorithms dates back to the 80s. So back then, though, there wasn't enough data sets. There weren't enough data sets to feed, to model all this kind of applications. So now I would say that, because, as you mentioned, Yogesh, I'm interested in the interplay between the internet and AI as concepts. During the early 2000s, up until 2010, we had this sort of wave of Web 2.0, this idea that the internet belongs to the people, belongs to the users, rather than a top-down entrepreneurial approach. So I was part of this generation. We were very much excited to upload things all the time, to share what we did on Twitter, to share, sharing is caring. You know, that slogan was very prominent at the time, to put pictures on Flickr, then Instagram, Facebook, and so on. Social media became part of our communication. What we didn't realize at the time, well, most of us, I guess, was that this created massive databases of what people were interested in, databases of what people buy, of what people want to consume, on how they prefer to entertain themselves. So this eventually in the late 2000s was picked up by certain machine learning scholars. They didn't really call it AI at the time. It took some years to actually reinvent the term AI. So they managed to optimize this idea of big data. Initially, big data was considered to be a problem. What we're going to do with all this data? It's a sort of informational pollution. That's how they called it back then. But they said, no, we can actually we can create gold out of the trash. So it's an alchemical kind of approach to AI and data. So AI got reinvented through this machine learning approach, and large language models that ChatGPT is all about is essentially taking advantage of these massive databases, and it's trying to achieve one of what is known to AI scholars as the holy grail, or as one of the holy grails of AI, that is natural language processing. So to have an artificial conversationalist who is able to be in dialogue with you in a way that appears to be very human, that is at the same time not so uncanny, so that it creates this sort of weird sentiment that, am I talking to a human or a machine? This indeterminacy humans don't really like, but they want to have some sort of not so glitchy conversation that is quite credible. So for example, we know these conversational agents from airline companies for many years now. I think it's over 5 years that KLM, for example, offers an automated conversational agent. Until now, these have been very poor in performance. The commercially available conversation agents have been quite poor in performance. They couldn't do over a certain amount of tasks. But then some recent attempts with loads of optimization and loads of clustering and so on are able to produce new text. By new, we mean statistically unpredictable text. It's not new necessarily in terms of content, but if you search that in within quotation marks in Google, you won't find that text. So statistically, it's relatively unpredictable and therefore new. But we need to be careful when we use such words such as new, because it's not exactly new. And the situation now is that there has been, I guess, lots of excitement about the achievements of natural language processing through large language models, and therefore people started competing. And when you have competition, you will eventually have some optimization. And because of certain cases of misuse, of over-reliance onto the results of generative artificial intelligence, there has been concern about the right use or the right to use them. And this comes together with a baggage of other problems that I might unfold and explain later on. I think you're on mute, Yogesh.
Yes, technology. Thank you so much for giving this account. And obviously, you know, it's a long history, but a lot going on at the moment. It seems like now it in kind of fruition stage is culminating to its use. Before it was just in developmental stage. So obviously, Laurie, Erpen, Tagwin, any thoughts before we move on to next segment?
I thought that was really interesting, Vassilis, and I really liked what you were talking about, the voices from different domains saying different things around AI and generative AI. And I guess we are, you know, all academics here. And with that hat on and thinking about the current news around the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak meeting in the last week with AI experts, more voices out there, but the apparent experts in the field, such as Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and they're talking about then existential risks of AI. In terms of academia and existential risks or the challenges, what do you see that being for us as academics, that kind of risk around this technology?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, thank you very much for this question, Tegman. So I think we need to be very careful when we use the word existential risk. Very carefully, you said we as academics, right? So our existential risk as academics might be very different than what any other user of or reader of a newspaper might perceive when they read the phrase AI will pose an existential risk. To share a little anecdote, my my trajectory with artificial intelligence culminated during that time when Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk back in 2014 heralded the potential existential risk of AI. Generative AI wasn't really. I think the term was invented around that time, 2014 or 15, but it wasn't really a big thing. But it was a time when there have been some achievements, some massive achievements with AI, and then we had these. I call them prestigious commentators. Who have expertise in one field, and we kind of doubt that they've got expertise in one field. So, for example, Stephen Hawking has been my child hero. Like, I read Universe in a Nutshell when I was 16. It was my favorite book. But then why does this amazing cosmologist talk about AI? So we had this sort of interesting interplay between experts of different fields talking about AI and creating some stir around the idea of existential risk. And it's very old. The idea of the existential risk is very old. It goes at least back to Samuel Butler, the novelist from the 19th century, who spoke about a new society where inorganic beings replace, from an evolutionary aspect, human organic beings. It goes back to Irwin Good, who was a friend of Alan Turing's, who suggested that there might be, in 1965, he suggested that in the future there will be an ultra intelligence that surpasses human intelligence that will be facilitated by machines. He was also inspired by Turing's work, and then every now and then, around every 15 or 10 years, there will be some prominent figure who will write a book or will make a grandiose statement about the existential risk posed by AI. Of course, we need to give some credence to the idea. So as scientists, we have the duty to be open-ended as to our agnosticism. But I would say that so far, we've learned sometimes the hard way, after lots of expenditure, lots of funding spent into existential risk research, that AI hasn't really posed an existential threat from the evolutionary perspective. That is what most people think about when they talk about existential risks. Now, if we narrow that down, though, my existence that is very much shaped by my cultural background, my cultural surroundings. So let's say my job, then if I feel that parts of my jobs might be threatened by certain automations, then that might count as a different flavor of existential risk. But that's not the same existential risk that the big newspapers are talking about. And I would say that calling that an existential risk kind of shifts attention from pressing issues that need to be addressed. So increased automation, for example, there's a long history in automation in classrooms, and I've got colleagues. For example, my colleague Barbara Hoff is working a lot on the history of automation in classrooms from the 60s onwards. And there have been waves of hype and disillusionment there as well. And usually, I think in the educational domain, it's a learning curve. Or in any job really. So ideally, automation steps in to alleviate some part of the tedious tasks that we do. A very typical narrative is that you introduce a little bit of automation, and then because it's very hard to sustain that automation, then there are another 10 types of jobs that emerge to sustain that automation. So sometimes the question is why we do that. And I'm not one of the people who will say stop automation, hinder innovation, ban some type of technology, because I'm not this kind of person, I guess. It's just a matter of aesthetics sometimes. I want to allow some technology to be explored, to be developed. But at the same time, we need to be critical. We need to be critical. What are the aspects of our work? And these are parts these are elements that I've been discussing in the paper that Yogesh mentioned earlier. So we need to find these precious aspects that make us unique in our environments, that may be our jobs or our communication manners and so on. Some other relatively existential risks, but I would rather call them political risks, have to do with labor. So it was revealed just a few months ago that much of OpenAI's optimization modeling labor actually came from Kenya, where people have been paid $2 an hour to optimize OpenAI's ChatGPT, because obviously ChatGPT is just learning from this vast data set of existing texts, and sometimes these texts can be very disrespectful. There is loads of racism, sexism, ageism, speciesism, ableism in the things that humans tend to write on the web, right? So it draws from all this material. But then when you're asking ChatGPT about something, obviously ChatGPT wants to give you a polished and relatively politically correct answer, right? Otherwise, people will stop using it. I think it was Elon Musk who called ChatGPT a woke language model, a term I disagree with, and a human I disagree with, but that's a different story. But it tells a lot about the work that needs to be done in order to sustain ChatGPT as a tool that is useful to many, not just a few. And this optimization that takes loads of time, although ChatGPT appears to be like magic, still it's like the internet. It's like looking things on Facebook and posting things on Facebook. It needs to be moderated. So if we call this underpaid labor a form of existential risk, then yes. But I wouldn't call it an existential risk, because I think that shifts attention once again from the and now just to touch a little bit on the experts consulted. I would find it very interesting that now some of the big AI experts who have had technical expertise with AI tend to take part in this sort of awareness campaigns about existential risk. I think that there is some concern about power there, because if you speak to AI workers, AI researchers from our academic backgrounds, from our academic environments, they will, most of them, the ones at least I've spoken to, they will never, well, maybe not never, but they'll be rather cautious when it comes to calling ChatGPT and large language model an existential risk. And I've got, in my research, I found out, I was asking AI experts, people who have AI as part of their technical expertise on their websites from informatics and computer science departments. I've asked them, what about limitations, and what would they do if they had all the money in the world, what they would do to advance AI. And they gave me so many reasons, so many things that ChatGPT is nowhere near achieving as to what might actually be a good case about artificial intelligence, about something that could actually compare with the intricate and nuanced and informationally rich an environment that we talk about when we talk about not just human intelligence, but even non-human animals that exhibit intelligence far more complex than any AI machine. That was a long way of answering a question, but I think that I tried to cover most of the aspects that are of my concern when I hear the phrase existential threat. But I hope I have covered at least some parts of the question.
Thank you very much, Vassilis.
I just wanted to kind of follow up something before we move on. So Vassilis, obviously you gave very nice kind of account in terms of that particular term, existential risk. When we go to more kind of practical level, more on kind of education specific matters, what aspect of education, what challenges you see specifically for education aspect? Now, education, when I call, is very broad. It includes from recruitment of a student to teaching to assessment to post-assessment, all that kind of things. Okay, and obviously people involved are teachers, students, administrators, managers, and senior leaders. Who you see most going to be mostly affected by this, and what specific challenges they may face, whatever you feel in your view.
Yeah, obviously you kind of do everything at the same time, right? So I picked up the thread from one point that seemed to be mostly challenging for my work, right? So I immediately thought of assessment, because I am marking hundreds of essays every semester, and obviously because I'm fascinated by the idea of AI, this seemed to me like a good challenge, something that I would like to examine. And my approach as a character, as a person, is that every time I see a challenge, I try to embrace that, make it part of my existence, and work with it in order to overcome potential fears. So when ChatGPT became released, and everyone on social media was like, "Oh, that's the end of assessment. What are we gonna do?" and so on. I started working with ChatGPT. I started looking at it. I gave some examples. I tried to. I actually wrote. Well, I didn't write an article using ChatGPT, but I tried to. I had some original ideas. I posed these questions to ChatGPT, and then I tried to construct the article using ChatGPT. Okay, and then I realized that the amount of work I need to do in order to finalize a draft, to me that was a revelation, because 99% of all the tweets and Facebook posts and conversations I took part about ChatGPT was that this is the end of writing and education and what we're gonna do with assessments. But I thought, no, the best thing that such a machine can do is offer a mock prototype, a pilot version of something. It gives me something to bounce back to disagree with, because what it offers is this very polished version. Because of the moderation I mentioned before, it cannot go, because it's so public, it cannot go beyond a certain type of thinking. And we as academics and our students, because I teach critical social science courses, I want my students to be critical, and I don't want them to have the standard answers. So, but again, I'm in this very privileged position of teaching students about courses that have no standard answers, that if they give me the standard answers, they are unlikely to achieve a high mark, because I want them to add something new. So I guess for social scientists like myself, there's nothing new about ChatGPT, but I think some other disciplines, so for example, if it's first year mathematics and the curriculum is based on solving types of equations and so on, and the answers are very well known to people. There are books that contain the answers, so in theory you can also, even way before the internet, I remember when we took mathematics at high school. In high school, we had the book with the problems, and we've been offered the book of solutions to the problems, so we could look and compare ideally we would look and compare with our own. Most students just copied from the solutions book and submitted that as coursework, and by the end of the year, they didn't know any mathematics because they were just copying the solutions book. And I think that if students use ChatGPT to write their answers, they face the same danger. They might get, I don't know what's the average in Swansea. In Edinburgh, you're very lucky if you get anything above 65 in social sciences. So if you want to get a 60, yeah, with some trimming and topping with ChatGPT, you can do that. But a 60 is not a mark that will get you, that will open many doors, right? It's the mark that you're gonna request when you want to have a paper that says University of Edinburgh, you know. But if you want to do something more with that, then you'll need to speak to your authenticity. So these are the challenges I started looking at. But then the more I looked into it, and that's what I'm talking about in the first part of that article, is this sort of normalization of lack of originality, that we are it's not GPT's fault, right? But it's our society that enables a culture of being average. So before ChatGPT, that writes amazing cover letters, introductions to grant applications, it has this sort of perfect syntax. If you submitted a text that wasn't so perfect to somebody, they might be biased because you don't speak the wooden language, the wooden speech of formal academic inquiry, of modes of writing. Or you might receive a comment that, yeah, what you're writing is interesting, but you need to phrase that in a different way, and so on and so on. And that created that sort of formality in academic environments, I think, enabled a huge market, a para-academic market, where students would, and other people, and academics, I know well-established academics, who would pay for writing assistants, for proofreaders, even an illegal market of essay meals, of people writing essays for other students, and we as teachers, as teaching staff, we have to play that game. I cannot prove that you have paid somebody to write your text. You submit it to me, you have paid a fortune to be here. I have nothing to say. You get your 70 or your 69, and you're satisfied with it. I'm getting paid, I'm satisfied with it. Unfortunately, I cannot call that education, but that's the way it is. And I think ChatGPT is just exacerbating or adding a little bit to that culture that is already there. We don't need ChatGPT to be afraid of students cheating. Though if you do a word cloud kind of thing, student and cheating, I'm sure that they will be very. And I think that sometimes, you know, a good way to cheat is an act of great intelligence. So to me, so what I did with my students, then, because I embraced ChatGPT from the first week, was to ask them to use it, because I knew that at some point they will start using it. And it was very funny that in the first couple of months, in the midterms, most of them were afraid of using it. They saw it as something that is imposed on them, as a new tool that they should be afraid of, as if I asked them to do R or Python, and they abstained from using it. In the final exams, they started using it a lot because it became very popular. But I asked them to write a model card. Model cards are is a term that is has been coined by Margaret Mitchell and her colleagues, that suggests that when you release a machine learning model, you should accompany that with a short model card that outlines where the data came from, what kind of limitations there are, what might be the social implications out of these limitations, and so on and so on. So it's a recommendation, it's an assessment recommendation that machine learning experts, machine learning producers, developers are getting additional credit if they actually do a model card. And I asked them to write a model card of, say, 200 words, how they used ChatGPT, what were the limitations, how much trimming and topping they had to do. And many students did that. Many students reported that actually it's not worth it. If we just read the articles we had to read, used our thinking and so on, just imitated a little bit of the academic writing style, would just save so much time. With ChatGPT, we ended up with 50 pages of text, out of which a 5% was useful, and we had to double check references that, due to algorithmic glitches, ChatGPT invented. So we had to actually see whether this reference is credible or not. I had, of course, some students who did some very poor work on that. So they tried, probably they didn't have enough time, right? So they took up the task of using ChatGPT. Then they started copying and pasting text, and you could see that the essay was all over the place. And unfortunately, they didn't score very high. But that's like relying to a paid service to write your essays. And I have marked essays that were obviously written by somebody else, by somebody who has never taken my courses, and it was completely out of context, and therefore although the text was written in perfect English, the content had nothing to do with my courses, so they scored very low or even failed the course. So I think that we are very much aware of the challenges in the educational sector. It just, ChatGPT is a reminder about who we are, where we are, and so on. And I hope that this kind of answers the question.
Before Laurie goes to further one, I just wanted to say my fear is now the things like SMLs, they will be using ChatGPT to create the work, and that will be worst thing, because they will be just creating and giving rather than asking human to write it, and that
but do we need essay mills anymore though? I mean, don't you think it's almost redundant, really?
No, because human want, people want confidence, right? That is produced by something. So rather than going to ChatGPT or doing things through ChatGPT, they will still go to SML, I believe. But the problem is the SML themselves will be using ChatGPT. That's my assumption, and that will be a further complications. But we'll see. We'll see.
I
if
think
I can jump in on that, though. Sorry, carry on. Yeah.
I was going to say that the thing with generative AI, ChatGPT being the first, as you said, it appeals to us as human beings so much because we're always looking for shortcuts, aren't we? A better way of doing things, and it appeals to us in that way so much. And I saw a case on Twitter. It was I think it was a lawyer in America who'd submitted something to the judge on the case he's working on, and he'd produced a response to this particular case, and he'd listed all these historical cases for precedent to support his particular view. But unfortunately, he'd used ChatGPT to do the work for him. Now, the previous historic cases didn't exist. Some did, but some didn't. And the judge spotted that some of the cases were just fiction. They just did not exist. And he got hauled up then for relying upon ChatGPT. So obviously, the mindset of the advocate in that particular scenario was, I've got a shortcut here, I can halve my work, and therefore I'll let ChatGPT do the work for us, really. And I wonder, because this is happening so quickly, isn't it? It's just, as you say, you were the first people on it. I think it was November 22, perhaps around there, and gosh, 6 months where it's just taken over. It's just staggering, really. And I think we're struggling, aren't we, when it comes to thinking about the best use of it, and maybe the default to just trying to, solve a problem, getting ChatGPT to give us what we want. It isn't really the full 9 yards, as we're finding out. But when you think, and you talk quite a lot about education and the use of ChatGPT, you talked about students using it. That was very interesting to how they view things. But when you think about education itself, higher education, what do you think is potentially a great use of generative AI? From the pedagogy sense, I think. If I'm a lecturer and I'm, a best case use of integrating ChatGPT or something like that within my teaching, how would you describe that, do you think?
Yes, that's a very interesting question, and actually something I'm writing proposals for right now for some of the courses I'll be teaching next semester. But so first thing to consider is that ChatGPT is just, in my view, the latest installation of a big digital innovation. Okay, so with Google, when people started searching Google, and when Google when Google introduced the sort of recommendation, like recommended searches, this spoke a lot to our I guess to our social and personal subjective position in the world. So other people search for means that I am here, and therefore I need to attune myself with what other people have searched for. And ChatGPT, being a conversational agent, users very quickly found out that they can use it as a search engine that is that appears to be more conversational and therefore more humane in a sense, and maybe more credible because of the big data. And now we see this sort of movement that many search engines adopt language models as part of their search engine. So the interface is changing. So I think that an extension of what we already know about how to use search engines as part of the teaching, what can we learn when we search that term, is extremely important. In particular, I've proposed to examine, to try to open the black box of ChatGPT, because obviously many of the things are patented, right? Many of the many dimensions of ChatGPT, although it's open AI, the data sets are not so open, right? So we don't really know how exactly that answer came about. So you want to have students who are critical thinkers and who know how data sets work, how models work, how optimization works, and you give them ChatGPT and you say, give me 10 examples from the music you're listening to, from your favorite type of holiday. Ask stuff that are mundane, then ask some stuff from your academic environment, like test it and see how it works, and then reverse engineer it. Try and reverse engineer it. I've got many students who are part social scientists, part computer or data scientists, and I want them to think critical about it, because if you come from a pure data scientist background, the typical problem is that what we call ground truthing in data science, that you've got an initial starting data set and a research question, and sometimes your research question is shaping how you're going to use your data set, or sometimes when you have a certain data set, you're going to base your research question on that. Data scientists take this for granted. Sometimes they don't interrogate that. That's why data scientists, some data scientists love taking courses from the social science, because we teach them to be critical, and we say, well, you can find another data set. If this data set doesn't work, try another one, or try a combination. See the limitations. Teach your customers that don't believe 100% to in the results. Like, try and interrogate that. So I think that ChatGPT offers a very good test board to understand how algorithms work. When you use I don't know if you teach courses like that, but I need to spend usually 2 weeks to ensure that my students understand what an algorithm is. It's this kind of questions, like you can always get students talking for 2 hours. You ask them, what is an algorithm? What is data? What is information? What is the internet? What is AI? They can talk for hours and never get their head around what it actually does. But ChatGPT is a good example to show how algorithms work and create algorithmic literacy, AI literacy, as long as you treat it from a sober perspective, and use it as an opportunity. And another, I mean, like I said, it's a good prototype. You can use it to prototype ideas. You can, if you want to build, if you're a more visual person, right? And you stare at the blank document in front of you, as you have sort of writer's block, and you want to do a mock outline of what you want to write. You can start by using that, but at the same time, remember that this is not perfect. This is not to be followed. Remember that together with you, another 500 people from the same course will do the same. So they will get very similar results about what is a good outline when it comes to, I don't know, analyzing techno-libertarianism versus techno-dystopianism. And then you get like 10 points that are very similar to each other. And then you realize that when you're marking out, okay, yeah, the students just use ChatGPT. But then if you're not good with structure, you're good with content, you can get an initial structure, rebuild the structure according to your own critical thinking. Okay, so that's how an outline actually looks, but I will make my own, but I've got the idea of how an outline looks. Now, if you struggle with content and you're very good with structure, you can write your outline, you can begin ask specific questions to ChatGPT, and then you can spot what you disagree with, and create your own sentence. In my case, I disagreed with nearly everything that ChatGPT produced, so I had to rewrite many things. And now I think it's a learning curve once again. So once you get fascinated, you try and use it, you realize how much work you need to do, you get disillusioned, and then you actually appreciate the actual writing. And to go back to Yogesh's comment on essay mills, I wouldn't be very much afraid of that, because if essay mills begin using ChatGPT, then the essays they will sell to students will be so bad that one generation, one semester of students will use them. All of them will either fail the course or get very, very low marks. And then students have huge networks. They will say, never use that essay mill again, because that's the result, right? Never underestimate the power of student networks. If they get a 55, everyone will know, and there will be reasons to abstain from the sources that led to a 55. So I think we live in this sort of oscillatory moment when we shake a little bit our heads. We're like, okay, what is my position here as a human? That's what I need to do. And it's always the case with automation, like search engines. Again, many computer applications that we use, they always pose some sort of existential or whatever question. But then we found out what makes us unique in that environment.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. And I think just homing on one point that you mentioned AI literacy, and within that, of course, you mean generative AI literacy as well. And I think our role must be just trying to sort of distill some of the key points you just said to ensure that our students question what we get back from generative AI, not to rely on it wholeheartedly. It is a skill, I think, and as you said, you've outlined, to be able to use it as a tool effectively to perhaps shortcut things or to give us more ideas based upon what the output is. It may be that isn't totally what we want, but it might give us more ideas. We use our brain more by using the output from ChatGPT. So thank you very much for that. Arpan, across to you.
Okay, so it's very interesting discussion, Vassilis. So very nice points you have made. So I was actually thinking from the continuum that you were talking about, that today students are talking about, or you were talking about AI literacy on one front, and AI literacy from that evolution should also lead to AI proficiency. Okay, that's a continuum of growth. And in this continuum, what you're talking about, there is a concept that was introduced in the economic space, which is called, the lemons market, the market of lemons. So you don't have actual information about a product, which is probably a car, which is a good car, which is not a good car. And so slowly the market averages are basically an expectation of it can be both a good car or a bad car. That was the concept of lemons. Similarly, students would also have that, the network information based on which they will actually say that, okay, this is something that is good to follow, this is something that is not good to follow. It's a very interesting debate that you have brought out. So, how do you think, administrators or people who are looking into administration in institution that are in the higher education space, they should try to cater towards, this change, this entire regulation, so that ChatGPT can be better utilized if it is going to be utilized in the academic system?
Yes, that's a great question, Arpan. I mean, we don't really know yet, right? Because the situation is pretty much shaped and molded every day. Every day there's something new, and there are discussions, about banning it. The weirdest regulation or tool that I encountered, and that I talk about that in my article, is that shows the absurdity of human society and the bureaucratization of our society nowadays, is introduce large language model detectors to software like Turnitin, plagiarism detection software. So how these work, because obviously every text made by a large language model generative AI application is statistically new, as I mentioned. So these plugins, they measure the statistical probability of that text being statistically improbable on the basis of existing text. So that's in very simple words, that's hiring a robot to tell if a robot has done something, which is
It's interesting. Actually, there has been cases where a class has actually not copied from generative AI, but then predictors or robots basically predicted that it has been copied by generative AI, and so the entire batch was failed by a professor.
Yes, and that's
so that came
again
up in the news a few days back.
And again, that's a very old problem. Even before computers, certain smart students, who'd write amazing essays, and the professor wouldn't believe them. They would say, no, there's no way that you, a second-year student, wrote that thing. But that's and it was a problem. But at the same time, in our case, in this case that you mentioned, it's that, like I said, our culture enables us to be so average that in my article I refer to a song by the German band Kraftwerk. Okay, so they've got a song called "We Are the Robots." In the song, they repeat, I think, 32 times the word "We are the robots," but in a very robotic way. So that they don't stress either the we or the robots or the are. So depending on what you want to listen to, you can hear as we are the robots. So we are the robots that come here to dance and take over your jobs and pose the existential threat, or we are the robots. We have turned ourselves into robots in a very robotic society, and the way we are writing essays, the professor might say, or the machine will say, that's written by a robot, that because it's so statistically predictable that it's a robot. So my challenge for both students and teaching staff is to adopt have you obviously encountered an I am not a robot challenge. It's an advanced, well, it's a mundane version of a Turing test. So you prove to a robot that you're not a robot. So I ask students, I don't care how you're gonna do it. It's up to you. You will prove in your essay that you haven't, that this essay was not written by a machine. You will find a way to make it so unique. I don't know what you're gonna do. So it's a challenge. And the same goes to teaching stuff. I don't know how you're gonna do it. Your teaching modules, your exercises, your essays, your essay recommendations will be structured in a way that no one can say this has been written by a robot. So that's how AI always since the 50s has been, from a philosophical perspective or a sociological perspective, has been an interesting challenger for sort of admitting our redundant practices, what we do in our everyday life, that if it can be done by a robot, maybe it's redundant. That's my approach to things, but also to sort of allow the unique elements of our culture to flourish. So to appreciate, why do we do academia? Why are we in these environments? Is it to write fund applications and mark essays that 85% of them are extremely similar, regardless ChatGPT or any other reason? Or are we here to conduct interesting dialogues and advance knowledge and explore through a curiosity-driven approach our world? So that's my take on it. Maybe it's a chance for us to think about what makes us unique, and that could be reflected in our teaching style, in our teaching commitments, and our teaching programs.
Right.
Thank you, Urban and Vassilis. If I remember correctly, in your article, you mentioned that a student used ChatGPT, and obviously, but the student was honest enough to just tell that yes, he has used it. Okay, and apparently the student, you conceded and you gave the good mark to student because student was honest and very transparent about it. So that's a kind of, also the way to kind of say, look, if you're using it, be clear, acknowledge it, So that's the thing. But I want to just kind of touch upon the things that you said, that we should be pursuing higher form of things, given that everything is so accessible and, a student can find out. But the problem is, if we rely on the higher form and we don't focus and don't ensure that they're learning the basic fundamentals, and then they don't do that, then what happens? That will be retrogression rather than, a form of challenge itself, that a generation will start losing the fundamentals, basically. This is an open question. How are we going to deal that with? We don't know.
But don't you think, Yogesh, if we sort of position your argument when the calculator was invented, and we might have thought to ourselves, well, all our educational system now, these log tables and sort of, manual methods, they'd lose those skills. We don't think about that now, do we?
See, the people do rely on it, and calculator has become part of the assessment. You see, it's been provided. If we are heading towards that, that's a different scenario, right? Very few people actually calculate complex mathematical formulae by using brain. They know the method, but they do the calculation using calculator. So there is impact of calculator clearly. Of course, you know, in India, we have these IITs where Arpan works, yeah? So the students there, they are calculator actually. They do all sorts of big calculations just by mind rather than by using calculators. So because there is emphasis, there is a need and requirement. If they don't do, they won't able to sustain. But where there are options, actually people do rely on calculators, and calculators has been given to them when needed to work on actually. So there is impact, Laurie. I agree with you what you said. I know the basic fundamentals are there, but how they operate is different now. Yeah. So yes, anyone want to?
Yeah, I was going to say actually, Yogesh, because I teach maths as well. So, you know, I see the power of the calculator and what it can unfortunately do in the positive sense, but also not do for our students. And part of my job on that module is getting students, if they have to use the calculator, but then also thinking about the problem from different ways so they can validate those answers themselves by thinking it through. And I think this is where we need to go in terms of ChatGPT, is using it as a powerful tool, because it is, in a similar way that a calculator on the internet has been used. But the beauty of the academic is we have experience, we have life experience, we understand the subject in different ways, not just academically, but you know, we've been probably in the field and worked in the field and are able to then validate the answers or the output of ChatGPT. Whereas students, they haven't got that experience and background. And therefore, I think also words such as intelligence, when it comes to artificial intelligence, hallucinations, we're giving it human-like characteristics when it's not. And I think we're skewing what students then see it as very human-like, because it is interacting with them in a human way, and they're trusting it. Whereas I think we as academics are not trusting it in that way, even though that language is being used, because of our experience.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting. I don't think we have answer for any of these things because it will take time to kind of see how the technology get domesticated, right? That's an important thing, how we actually adapt it at different levels. Look, we still don't allow internet. We do allow internet to use to search things, but we don't allow internet in any other form in your exams or any other form of assessment, do we? So we haven't reached to that level, and I don't think institutions or we as an educator would be comfortable allowing these kind of tools so easily and so quickly in informal assessment process. Yeah, that's just my thought.
Yeah, I mean, these are all amazing provocations and thoughts. They speak to so many of our concerns. I read on Twitter, I think 2 days ago, somebody proposed that we that to avoid that, so as impromptu tests in class, like we did, I think in high school. So instead of, so at least in Edinburgh, we are very liberal. We always give students some weeks to write their essay. Of course, they will use the internet, I mean, by default. So we never really restrict them in any way. To return to that example from the student that I gave, not a very high mark, I gave them a B, whereas normally they should get a C. But what I appreciated was that it was the first semester, it was the first essay of the semester, and they took they were courageous, they were just one of the 3 people who used model cards, like what I mentioned before. Whereas in the second essay, many students used that. So there was a vast diversity. So that student was one of the first people. But what the student helped me realize is the difference between algorithmic glitch and human error. So that essay I want to print and make like to hang it on my wall. I was expecting when I read in the introduction that they used ChatGPT, I was expecting to read a very polished, in terms of language, essay, but it was complete with grammatical mistakes, inconsistencies of the critical thinking mind. You know, sometimes when we think critically, sometimes we exaggerate a bit. We say things, we get very passionate. Something that ChatGPT doesn't do. And that essay was full of these kind of things that when you're marking an essay, you deduce marks because you say, no, you didn't consider, you didn't sort of foresee that argument, or you didn't include both perspectives from this, or you didn't cite that. But then the student says, but I used ChatGPT and gives examples. And I thought that there is something so interesting in that aura of that essay, that it became original by being erroneous. So I pun in the article, I called it originality. It's originality through error. Of course, it's not a tactic. I mean, that student was lucky because that student was the first one to do that. But I foresee many essays that have bad uses of ChatGPT, like Tegwin said, bad uses of calculators. Right, so we are, yes, technologies can solve certain problems, but we need to learn how to use them and to make them to how to domesticate them, as you said, Yogesh, and like Laurie, I think, pointed out, there is this process where we discard some parts of the so with calculators, mostly, unless you do you want to ensure that in your class people learn how to do the mind operations in maths, and you can do the high level calculations. If the point of the master's program of their graduate program you do is not about that, then you will use a calculator, because there's no point in doing that. So, and likewise, we use Google Maps or other open maps and so on to navigate, and it's part of many people's everyday life. But we also need to consider many things that the internet studies have taught us. Two key things in addition to the labor question that I mentioned. One is environmental dimensions. One of my recommendations to large language model developers is to provide with estimates of carbon emissions required for every query. And if, for example, you, and that's going to be very useful for students as well, because many of my students come from activist backgrounds, and so, and they want to claim that they are environmentally aware and so on, but they are using loads of technology. So and that's not just for large language models, that's for technologies in general, but large language models are notorious in their carbon emission footprint. If there was an indicator, which is very hard to calculate, I admit, but for example, your use since you started logging in with that account on ChatGPT of the language model currently is around, let's say, an approximation of that amount, which equals to, say, an airplane ride to Amsterdam, something like that. And the other dimension, what was the other dimension on top of labor? It will come up later. But yes, the environmental dimension is extremely important to think. Yeah.
Great. I think we don't want you to miss your flight. So thank you. Thank you very much, Vassilis. It was fantastic conversation. It was so enjoyable to just kind of discuss these things to ease out our anxiety, actually. and not just, create awareness, but also our own anxiety. So it was such a nice conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you, Tagwin, Arpan, and Laurie. And I end here with this thanks. Thank you so much. And we'll continue to discuss, obviously, with other platform. But yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely. May I extend my gratitude to all of you as well, Tegwin, Arpan, Laurie, and Yogesh for initiating this, also for being here on a Saturday. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed all of our conversations and so on. So we keep in touch. And if I can be of any assistance in the future, just let me know. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Thank you so
you.
much.
Bye.
Thank you.